So the concept for the development of the site is that the lower levels, fronting onto Loampit Vale at Thurston Road and the new proposed Station Square, would have non-residential uses, commercial uses on the ground floor, and there'll be a proposed unit outlined in orange, which will be a possible future ticket hall and access to the Lewisham station. The access to the upper floors of Building B, which is entirely student accommodation, would be from Loampit Vale, and the access to the upper floors of Building A, which is a mix of residential accommodation and student housing, is from Thurston Road. The scheme has the proposed development is very similar to a consented scheme on the site that was granted in March of this year. The key differences are the proposed land use, which would propose built student accommodation in Building B, with a portion of Building A, and an increase in the number of residential units on the site. There's a proposed basement floor with the ancillary services, including cycle parking and bin storage in the energy centre. The building height has increased slightly, and there's been a significant increase in floor housing that's offered by the developer in relation to the proposed development. So that's increased from the application. The consented scheme had floor housing of 49 units, or 22.55% per house floor, and the application site has 92 units, 28.97 per unit, 27.32% per house floor. So this diagram shows the difference in the building height of Building B. So the consented scheme is on the left, and the application scheme is approximately 5 meters, 4.75 meters taller than the consented scheme. So in addition, the application scheme is for 35 stories in the tall building, compared to 30 stories in the consented scheme. There hasn't been a reduction in the floor ceiling heights, but there has been efficiencies achieved by the proposed modular construction. So the floor plate between each floor has less depth, so that allows for the provision of more floors. These are illustrative diagrams showing the two schemes compared three-dimensionally. So you can see the application scheme on the right and the consented scheme on the left. I have a couple of street views which make use of the visual impact assessment images of the proposed development. So this is a view of the site from Loampit Vale to the west of the site. This is the proposed view from Loampit Vale. This is the view towards the site from Loampit Hill Railway Bridge. And this is a view from a similar location, which shows the application scheme. This is a view from Thurston Road to the northwest of the site. And this is a view of the proposed development from a broadly similar location. This is a view of the site with the proposed development from Connington Road, from the former Tesco car park. This is the same view, just highlighting the differences in the building heights. So the diagram on the left illustrates the red line of the consented scheme, on the right the application scheme, just to show the slight difference in the building heights. This is a view from Armory Way. And this is a view of the scheme from Cornwall Gardens area, just next to the glass tiles leisure centre. So the scheme on the left is the consented scheme, and the scheme on the right is the proposed scheme. So they look very similar from that angle. And then a couple of strategic views which show in blue the proposed development, and in grey the consented schemes, and in yellow the other schemes. To the right, the yellow shows the Connington Road scheme, which isn't actually consented yet. So this is the view from Mansfield Road, Blackheath, showing the application scheme in blue. From Blythehill Fields to the southwest of the site, from Hilly Fields to the southwest of the site, from Elveston Road to our station. Okay, so I'm going to run quickly through the proposed floor plans, but so this is the proposed ground floor level. So in the centre of this area here, I don't use the cursor, I can. This is the unit that would be become the future ticket hall has been measured now. Sorry, this is very sensitive. The small diagram on the right illustrates that area of the ground floor plan is communal ancillary uses for the proposed student units that are in Building B with communal facilities and ancillary services. This is the first floor plan showing a commercial unit in Building A above the ground floor, a void over the proposed ticket hall, and the other spaces on that level are communal amenity spaces for the proposed student development. This is the second floor level, which is only different to the other levels in that it has an indoor play facility for the residents of Building A in C3 housing, and an outdoor amenity space as well, and a connection between Building A and Building B to enable those living in the student accommodation in Building A to access the communal facilities in Building B. This is a typical floor plan, so it shows all of Building B being student accommodation in a variety of different kinds of units, and Building A being in a mix of 5 student housing units, which are the small ones. I won't touch the screen in case it flicks. On the right hand side of the building, and the rest of the floor plate is for C3 housing. This is showing low 19, which is the top floor of Building A, which again shows student housing on the right and C3 housing unit on the left. And this is the top floor of Building B, which is floor 34. This is the basement, which is different to the consented scheme, so the basement's been included, which includes effectively the ancillary services to the upper floors, enabling the ground floor development to be more active. This is the southwest elevation, the northeastern elevation, the southeastern elevation, the north elevation. This is a typical bay detail Building A, which is proposed to be in brown, grey brown brick with bronze accent on the details around the windows and other building features. This is the bay detail of Building B, which utilises the same bronze detail and a different light grey brick to surface. That's the detail showing those materials. This is the proposed landscape design, which showing the new square that's proposed to be fronting onto Loampit Vale and Thurston Road, and the loading bay fronting onto Thurston Road. And it also gives you a feel for the colonnade which fronts onto the square as well, which enhances the nature of the square. This is an artist's impression of the square, which gives you a good feel for the way that people would access the proposed tube station.
Could you point out where the entrance to the tube station?
Okay, I'll risk it. Let's find the cursor. There. So the entrance to the tube station is in this area here. That's clear, behind the tree, and the first bay about building. So the square is designed to provide an axial route to the station access. And this is the proposed indicative landscape for the rooftop communal spaces, and it also illustrates the re-roofs on both buildings, on the entirety of the top of Building B, and on one bay of Building A. So the applicant has worked closely with Transport for London to ensure that the structural design of the proposed development and the proposed basement would safeguard the Bakerloo Line extension. This has been a really important thing to sort out to ensure that the Bakerloo Line is safeguarded Transport for London have now confirmed that the proposed design will not have a negative impact on the future exclusion zone of the proposed Bakerloo Line extension with a tunnel that would go underneath the site. So this slide here shows an indicative configuration of the ticket hall, which would provide an access to the Bakerloo Line station, the tube station, and also an underpass that would go through under the railway to the proposed reconfigured Lewisham interchange. With regards to affordable housing, the offer of 28.9% or 92 units significantly exceeds that permitted under this consented scheme of 49 units, and comprises a mix of 63 C3 housing units on a 60% target social rent to 40% shared ownership mix, and 76 affordable student housing units, which is 10% of the student housing. Both the Council's independent viability review and the GLA have confirmed that this is the maximum reasonable affordable housing offer. The affordable housing offer is also supported by Lewisham's Strategic Housing Department. The permission will be subject to a viability review mechanism in accordance with the London Plan Affordability Housing Viability SPG. The agent of change principle applies to the bus layover adjacent to the site, and the scheme has been designed to mitigate the noise impacts of the potential noise pollution sources in compliance with the draft London Plan policy. This is addressed in pages 59 to 60 of your main report. Air pollution levels on Loampit Vale do not achieve air quality objectives. However, the scheme meets all air quality neutral benchmarks, and therefore no mitigation is required. A planning obligation is included for a financial contribution towards the Lewisham Construction Forum and also participation in that forum. The applicant has also worked closely with the Environment Agency to ensure that they're satisfied that there's no material increase in flood risk as a consequence of the proposed development, subject to conditions and an obligation, which is set out in the addendum report. The transport impacts of the proposed development are set out in pages 70 to 84 of the report. The scheme proposes significant enhancements to the public realm, and a number of transport-related obligations and transitions are set out in the report, including a financial contribution towards the development of an off-site cycle parking hub, as requested by Lewisham cyclists and endorsed by Lewisham's Transport Department. The proposed standard of accommodation is considered to be good by officers subject to planning conditions relating to noise pollution, solar protection, privacy, noise and air quality, and an obligation to fund improvements to play facilities at the Cornwall Lane playground. Internal daylight and sunlight levels reflect the urban nature of the site and the configuration of the development, although the building design makes best use of this to provide good levels of daylight and sunlight to living rooms. And where levels are relatively low, this is mitigated by having dual aspect rooms. Daylight and sunlight impacts of the development proposal on neighbouring properties are slightly increased due to the slight increases in the volume of the building compared to the consented scheme. The proposed impacts are set out at pages 62 to 67 of the report. The impacts are considered to be acceptable by officers given the town centre location of the scheme, where a level of change is to be expected. The vast majority of impacts are to bedrooms, which are not significant due to their primarily nocturnal use. Where living kitchen diners are affected, the vast majority of these have recessed windows to balconies that already receive levels below BRE guideline standards, and many have more than one window, improving their amenity. In conclusion, the application scheme is very similar to the consented scheme on the site, although it does have a number of planning benefits which exceed that offered by the consented scheme. At a strategic level, the proposed development safeguards the proposed BLE route and does not prejudice the proposed Lewisham interchange development, which is two very important strategic aims for the development of Lewisham Town Centre. The proposed development makes an affordable housing offer that significantly significantly exceeds the previous affordable housing offer and also offers a number of additional obligations to mitigate the proposed development. For example, relating to improvements to Thurston Road, Loampit Vale pedestrian crossing and provision of a new cycle hub. It also proposes a new ticket board on commercial units, a new public square, and a significant quantum of residential development. Obligations are set out in paragraph 10 of your report and summarised in the recommendation. The total civil liability would be over 3.6 million for local and mayoral civil. The list of planning conditions are listed within part 19 of your agenda, which is on pages 118 to 143, relating to issues such as the Bakerloo line safeguarding, flood risk, noise protection, construction management, land contamination, materials, energy, cycle parking, landscaping, and delivery service plans, along with the proposed obligations. And members are asked to agree the recommendation outlined in the addendum report.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Members, any questions for the planning officer first of all? Councillor Walsh first and Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a couple of questions that are technical and around the student housing element primarily at this stage. So my first question is around about the daylight sunlight, and we don't think it's an issue because it's only most of the living spaces, day-to-day living spaces aren't affected. My first question around that is, actually student bedrooms are the main place in which they live, work and study, and has that been thought about in that statement when you're making it? Because students live in their rooms, having a dark room that they are living in is going to cause a significant problem. I also quite like some guidance, and this might be coming from our principal planning officer tonight or legal, but I've been looking at the differences between the adopted London plan and the draft London plan. Both have weight in this circumstance around student accommodation. I would quite like to know if there has been a nomination agreement put in place with a HEI, because that changes in both of these the circumstances. So in the London plan, 3.53C, for those of you that are following along, says that not robustly secured for students, it will normally be subject to the requirements of affordable housing policies, which I believe is talking about whether or not it is definitely going to be for year-round student accommodation, or if it flips in and out of being it, and if there is a nomination agreement. In the new plan, it talks about a 35% target for affordable student accommodation, which is based on 55% of the maximum loan that is available to students through a year, which is an amount that is about £9,000, depending on where you are in the country. It needs a nomination agreement, and also talks at 4.17.5 adequate functional living space. And I think that's interesting to think about within inside this building, because this is vertical buildings at scale. Just a reminder to members that the draft London plan says there is a pipeline demand of 3,500 student halls a year, which this is providing about 25%. So we need to get this right. This is significant development at height. This is vertical living, and I really do worry about the impacts of dark bedrooms as primary living spaces and on mental health. We know this is a mental health crisis in higher education.
Have you got a note of those? We are going to have a brief presentation with the applicants as well, so they might be able to answer some of the questions, particularly about whether they've got agreements in place yet.
Okay, so there's student accommodation and daylight and sunlight quantities. So the internal daylight and sunlight quantities are set out on page 56 of the main report, and the proposed building B has a very good level of daylight and sunlight.
A very good level to the living spaces or to the bedrooms, because the living space in our forms of residence tends to be the kitchen, which a student doesn't spend the majority of their time in. living. They spend the majority of their time living in their bedroom.
Yeah, so the building, broadly speaking, is on a north-south axis. So it's very clear from the assessment that the bed spaces will have good levels of daylight and sunlight, apart from in relation to a couple of rooms which are north facing. If I can refer you to page 60, so in terms of daylight, 91% of the rooms have very good levels of daylight and sunlight. That's in terms of daylight distribution, and 96% in terms of northern measure. So they all have very good levels of daylight and sunlight.
Okay.
In terms of the nomination agreement, so if I can refer you to the consultation section of the report. So you're right in that obviously the draft London plan does have a proposed policy relating to the imposition of nomination agreements. So this, in the view of officers, the draft London plan policy doesn't have sufficient weight for us to give it full weight. The scheme's been assessed so that it complies with the existing policy framework. And in that there is no nominations agreement, but there's an obligation which fulfills the same intent that a student housing provider would be secured prior to the occupation of the building. So the space within the student accommodation will be for student housing in perpetuity, subject to a couple of weeks of the year when it would be student housing during summer weeks.
Have we included a condition that assures the student housing in perpetuity aspect that you just mentioned?
Sorry, not in perpetuity. It's an obligation that it's student housing, used for student housing purposes, and if there was a change, then it would require planning permission.
You raised an interesting point about for a certain amount of the year. Is there a condition that requires a certain amount of the year and not a whole year? So, for instance, there would be private housing providers that require a student to sign up to a 50-week contract. Students don't like 50-week contracts, it's unaffordable, and actually 35 weeks would be better practice. Do we have...
There's an obligation in there which defines the number of weeks. I don't recall exactly how many weeks. I need to have a look. But yeah, they're not paying for the full year, they're paying for the academic year from memory. 42 weeks, I think, but I'll just double check. Yeah, it's 42 weeks. So that's the basis for the occupation of students at those units.
Okay, and what is the intention for the 10 weeks when there are no students?
I can't answer that question. That's a question for the applicant.
Sorry, what was that question again?
What is the intention for those units for the 10 weeks of the year when the students aren't there? Because that is a significant period of time which might have users that have significant other needs, such as children from abroad.
Okay. I don't think we know yet. I don't think we know the answers to that.
Yeah.
I know what you're getting at because I used to work for a university too. But so I know about the other potential uses for student housing. But we may not be able to answer it.
Okay.
Councillor, question for the applicant. Well, yeah, we could try asking the applicant, but he may not know either. Councillor Clark.
Thank you. My question, the daylight was one of my issues as well, but also I was interested in the floor plate and the thickness of the floor plate, because apart from just daylight, it has to be livable, because often students can make quite a lot of noise, and being up all night before exams is not a good idea while listening to somebody else. I wanted to know much more about the floor plate thickness and the standard of noise insulation that there would be. That was the first one. My second concern, but we have a consented scheme, was the height as opposed to public space that's available. I still feel it's a very limited public space, and we just seem to be going up and up and up. And I worry that we don't always consider the overall impact of adding yet one more tall building after the next, rather than looking at the whole impact along the street, that it becomes sort of a dark corridor. But it was mainly the floor plate, and could you also, there was one thing on the Blackheath letter that I was interested in. They were saying about the recent public inquiry on Conrington Road. Do we believe that there's anything regarding to that? Because they seem to feel that that would have an impact on future policy going forward, or may have something that we can learn from that. Is there anything substantive within that? They're saying we should wait for that decision in order that we can learn for other sites. I'd just like you to clarify if there's anything there, because I didn't quite understand that.
Yes, I've got 3 points here. The noise insulation one, I mean, the answer I can give is that units need to be designed according to the building regs, so there's specific noise requirements and they'd be designed to achieve that, but the applicant may wish to add technical details on the construction of the floor plate.
Yeah, because I wanted to know if it's been reduced,
Yeah,
if that has an impact.
Yeah. It has to comply with building regs.
Yeah, I'd still like to know what impact there would be, if there's any change.
So you had a question about height versus public space?
Yes, I just feel we're adding extra height on, but we have limited public space. It seems that we're getting very high and limited public space around these buildings. And
well, this scheme is providing a public square, which is approximately 750 square metres if you include the colonnades. It's approximately a quarter of the site, so it's a big proportion of the site.
okay.
The building height only, so there's a consented scheme in the site, and this is a marginal maybe wrong, but a small increase in the height of the building.
Yeah.
In terms of Conington Road, I don't think that's pertinent, really. I mean, there's a consented scheme on the site, there's a small increase in the building height. This tall building is located in the town centre on the site of the proposed tube station, and it makes sense that it's a landmark building to denote that location.
Sort of a landmark building.
Thank you.
Exactly what the applicant for Conington Road said, but I'm sure we're all familiar with the extent to which we can consider other schemes in relation to reaching a decision on this one. Councillor Gibbons, I have you indicating next.
Yes, on that kind of approach to Loampit Vale, there is an incredibly congested crossing and hundreds of passengers of trains rush into that area to cross the road. I can see that there's going to be a Healthy Streets audit and a financial contribution made to improvements of that area. Actually, it could be a question for the applicants, but does that Healthy Street audit and the funds, is that handed over before or after construction? I'm just quite wary of receiving the funds but adding all the extra units on top of that area, extra passengers, without being able to do the works in time.
Yeah, so the report sets out a number of obligations. So one of them is that the pedestrian crossing is to be double in size, I think, to 8 metres to increase the capacity of the crossing, to make it safe for people to cross the road. There's also a financial contribution towards making the pedestrian environment safe on Thurston Road under the Healthy Streets audit, which would follow on from that. And there's also a financial contribution to improving pedestrian safety between the site and Lewisham Station as well, to do those improvements that are necessary. And under the scheme, the applicant will also provide the square and improvements to the footpaths immediately around the square as well. And they'll be completed prior to occupation.
Okay, just one more quick comment. I saw, and this is just to help me kind of clarify some things in the report. TfL made a lot of recommendations based on a section 278 agreement. Were all of those recommendations accepted, and if they weren't accepted by officers, you just go into the
has 16% of rooms, I think, that are non-BRE compliant, the DD test, 15% for the ABF test, and 45% for the ABSH test. And then building B, 9, 4 and 26 for those tests respectively. It then goes on to say in 8151, I've got down here, building A offers accommodation with slightly lower levels of daylight and sunlight overall as a result of the northern and east elevations. However, these elevations are almost entirely bedrooms, mostly student study rooms, and one C3 unit as their cause. So I'm a bit confused by what answer I got before about the impact of this onto bedrooms, because it seems like from that table that there might be some impact. So if you could talk us through the table and what that means, because at the worst case scenario, it looks like almost 1 in 10 rooms would be below standard.
Okay. This is the typical floor plan here. So the building A has a north elevation, south, east and west. So the student bed spaces, 4 of them are on the north elevation. So they would have, they'd be north facing, so they wouldn't have good access to sunlight, but they'd still have good daylight levels.
Just 4.
Yeah, well, sorry, let me go back. So there's 4 there.
Yep.
And there's one more, sorry, I can't see the person myself. There's one more just below that. Yeah.
If this was a studio flat, would we not normally expect to have a dual aspect? And this is what I'm trying to test about whether or not there is potential here for bad quality housing, and that's what I think is a legitimate question for you to ask. So you're saying those 4 there, and I'm a bit confused. What's on the other side of that lift? Should you stare?
Okay, so
they all seem to be pointing the same
I
way.
see my cursor around here. So this is the student housing area here.
Yep.
And the rest of the floor plate is C3 housing.
Yeah.
So this unit here, which has its bedrooms north facing, has a living room facing west, and the second outlook to north. So it benefits from west light and north light.
Okay. Could you talk us through the table? Because I'm really interested in this table 14 and what it means, please. It's on page 70. Well, 66, sorry.
Yeah.
The print of the children.
Okay, so proposed building A, so there's 2 tests for assessing daylight. So 82 rooms were assessed. So 69% of those, 84% of those are BRE compliant, and 16% aren't. And in terms of sunlight, 55% are, 45% aren't.
So that's quite significant, because it seemed before like we were saying that it wasn't significant in only respect to a small number. 45% on sunlight and even 16% on daylight, to me, doesn't necessarily build a healthy place to live, particularly if students are spending a significant amount of time in that space. And that's something I think that we might need to have.
So the impacts of you correctly highlight the impacts on the rooms affected are on the north elevation, so they're principally bedrooms, and there are 4 student bed spaces there which are north facing, which would have good daylight but not so good sunlight. But that would be taken as read because it's north facing. So the building has a north elevation, and those units face north.
And where is their on that floor plan, can you show me where their communal space is? And what daylight access did that communal space have?
Okay, so the communal space for the student housing is on the ground floor and the first floor.
Sorry, no, the communal space for the flat. So are they self-contained flats, or is there a common kitchen?
You talking about the
Just student accommodation.
Student accommodation. Yeah, so the communal space is contained within building B. So to provide for the student units, there's games room.
No, sorry, I'm talking about things like kitchen.
Oh, kitchen. They're self-contained units.
Okay. So, okay. All right. Let's leave it there.
Okay, I think we know what we've got now.
Yeah.
I mean, perhaps we can ask the developer how they're demonstrating that it's provides good amenity for residents and how they consider that should be moderated in its student accommodation. Councillor Gallagher, is there still a question?
Sorry, yeah, I realise that this might actually be better to Jeremy than to the developer. In terms of the late stage review at 75% occupation, how will that work in terms of the fact that the nature of student accommodation is that people are there for a year and then it's moving on, and it's not like it's not like a normal housing block where people will necessarily end up being occupied for a bit longer, if that makes sense. Just because of the nature of student accommodation means that it'd be pretty easy to not all necessarily be 75%.
I'm not sure why there's a difference.
Well, one of the reasons it says in the report isn't actually about people moving out every year.
Yes, the very nature of student halls is that people tend to live there for a year or less, and the fact that people will be most likely on shorter term contracts, they won't necessarily be there for a year, will mean that people will be moving, and the flow of people coming in and out, in terms of the occupation, will be at a much higher. I think it's unreasonable to think that it will be at a much higher rate of coming in and out than in a normal housing block. And I'm just asking how that impacts on the late stage review of 75% occupation, basically.
So the late, maybe, as far as I understand, the late stage review is a mechanism to establish whether sufficient affordable housing has been provided.
Yes, I know that. What I'm asking about is the fact that it is triggered at 75% occupation, but the differences in occupation of student housing compared to homes and flats. I don't really know how to explain this in a different way. If anyone can explain.
Are you suggesting that the building might never be 75% occupied and therefore the review would never be triggered?
I'm suggesting that it is. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that it's a little more complicated than it would be in a normal block of flats, and I'm wondering what we're doing about that.
It's 75% based on the first occupation of the building, so when the building's first occupied.
So does our condition make it clear then? Perhaps we need some legal scrutiny of it here. Does our condition make it clear that it's as soon as 75% of the units have been occupied for the first time, even if they subsequently become unoccupied, because there is a higher level of turnover of students in accommodation than would be of other types of people who would rent accommodation?
The application will be triggered for the late stage review when 75% of the units are first occupied.
Okay.
So as soon as 75% are occupied,
have been occupied.
have been occupied or let or sold or whatever, then it will trigger. So the first time that 75% happens, then the review will happen.
Okay, that sounds to me as if it covers the possibility that you're thinking about quite rightly.
it's to capture any increase in value once the
Yeah.
scheme is occupied.
Okay, right. Timmy, you have a question? Okay. Liam, did you have another question?
I did, but it's,
If it slipped from your mind, shall we go to the
yeah, well, I
applicant
was just going to say the consented scheme, it had the same layout, the same north-facing. The issues of light were still there that were raised by my colleague. You know, it hasn't.
It's the same. It's the same. Sorry, it's the same slight configuration.
Yeah,
Same bit.
yeah. Okay.
This is true. Okay, shall we hear from the applicants? I believe you are happy to address us for 5 minutes and then answer questions. I'm sure if there are questions that have been you've heard us discussing, you can either address those or we'll ask them to you again when you finish your 5 minutes if you want to fill up that time. What do you want to tell us? And you'll need to press the button on your mic so you will be. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Matthew Murray, and I'm the agent for the planning application, acting on behalf of the applicant, Tide Construction. I'm joined here this evening as well by two senior representatives from JTP, the architects for the scheme, for this version of the scheme, and also the architects from the original consented scheme as well. In February 2018, the Council resolved to go on planning permission for the redevelopment of the site for a residential-led mixed-use scheme, which approved two buildings of 30 and 16 stories in height. That previous application secured the provision of 49 affordable housing units. The application before you this evening is in effect an amendment to that previous permission. Many aspects of the development are virtually identical to last year's planning application, and these include the same site layout, the same relationship between the two proposed buildings, the same extensive public realm and new station square, the same safeguarding to facilitate a new western entrance into Lewisham Station, the same safeguarding with the Bakerloo line extension proposals, the same architectural treatment of the buildings, and the same car-free development. By the very nature of submitting this full planning application, there are of course some differences between this scheme before you this evening and that which the Council approved last February. The three main differences are the provision of student accommodation within the scheme, the increase in the height of buildings equivalent to 1.5 stories net additional floors on the tallest building, and the change in the level of affordable housing. The first two differences, namely the inclusion of student accommodation as the main element of private accommodation, coupled with 1.5 stories net additional floors on the tallest building, provide the basis for the substantial increase in the level of affordable housing compared to the approved scheme. That scheme proposed the provision of 49 affordable apartments. This application proposes 67 affordable residential apartments and 76 affordable student study bedrooms. Even disregarding the provision of the affordable student accommodation, the scheme delivers an additional 28 affordable residential units, which equates to a 57% increase in the level of affordable housing units compared to the approved scheme. The scheme has been subject to scrutiny by the Council's planning and design officers to ensure that the key components of the scheme deliver the same level of quality. The scheme has also been consulted upon at exhibitions prior to the submission of the application and further consultation during the determination of the application by the Council. At the same time, the scheme has been subject to scrutiny by the Council's Design Review Panel. All of these processes have influenced the scheme to ensure that the design, appearance and principles of the scheme adhere to those of the approved scheme as determined by the committee last February. We trust you'll conclude that the substantial increase in the level of affordable housing, coupled with all the other planning benefits of the original scheme, is worthy of the committee's support this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee might have. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Walsh, Councillor Gallagher, Councillor Curran.
Okay, to pick up the line of conversation with the officers earlier, do you have...
James, could you speak up, please?
Yes, of course. To pick up a line of conversation with the officer earlier, do you have a partner, a HEI partner, or a private provider of halls that you are currently working with on this? What changes have you made based on their feedback about what the specific needs of students are, i.e. the fact that in this area we have an issue with the provision of broadband services, for instance, which sees broadband congestion as one of the highest in the country. Adding in high users of broadband facilities within it will stop people getting online. But also there are a whole host of other things which I'm not going to give you the answer to. If you wouldn't mind letting me know what you've done to build this space for students, and who you've been talking to and engaging with on that to be the operator of it.
Time Construction are one of the larger developers of student accommodation in London, and they've got extensive experience, including in Lewisham, of developing student accommodation. They work with probably the top two or three of the student management companies in the UK. Obviously, we've got thousands of student study bedrooms up and down the UK. I'm not aware of the issues in relation to broadband congestion that you referred to, but I do know that the student scheme further around the corner on Thurston Road, which is currently known as the Lewisham chapter scheme, to my knowledge at least, and I've visited on a number of occasions, I haven't heard any complaints about congestion and student broadband in that accommodation. I think knowing that the efforts that TIE go to in terms of the way they design their schemes, whether that's in terms of the physical dimensions of the units or whether it's to do with the quality of the interior design of the accommodation as well. My experience of dealing with TIE over many years now has been that they go to significant lengths to make sure that these facilities, including broadband, will work. And they will be talking to the necessary providers of that broadband facility to ensure that that provision, ultimately, it's in TIE's interest to make sure that they've got a scheme that doesn't fall down on basic provision that all students will be looking forward to have within the scheme.
Okay, so yeah, I haven't heard anything that makes me think that this has been specifically thought of as student accommodation. I'm always very concerned when it is studio apartments for students, particularly when they are off-site from the main location of where the provision of education is going to be. It creates an insular community that doesn't integrate. It's got limited amounts of ability for students to mix and build the friendship groups. They've moved to a different city, they're at higher risk of stresses. These are big issues for students. There's also the costing factor of this. So quite often developers tell students that you want to have normally an ensuite room with a common kitchen. You're going one step further and doing the studio flat approach here. That is a high cost model of student housing, and actually what students want is somewhere safe, affordable, which builds communities. And I'm not seeing particularly anything. I know you've got something called the ground floor, which is about, I think it's called a gaming room or whatever it was. But I don't see any of the things that are going to help students mix and get out of their rooms.
The scheme is a mixture of accommodation as far as the student accommodation is concerned, and that includes self-contained study bedrooms, which also have communal areas. So I think one of the plans that were up on the screen earlier, I think that's a sort of typical floor plan there. You can see that there are 6 to 7 student bedrooms related then to a communal dining facility to allow those students to be able to mix and integrate on each floor of the building.
Sorry, could you point that? Could
Yeah,
you point where that
because
out
we were
is?
told this was not the case.
I thought that space had been removed.
Any ideas by the
cluster flats. Yeah, I think the cluster flats are the ones on the south of the building. Is that correct? Yeah. Yeah. So the living space is on the south of here, and that's the place.
I
where
can't see, but like, can you actually get up?
So is that bit there the one bit for that entire floor?
Stick.
stick or a stick?
So, right, yeah, this is a kind of a communal,
Okay, those are kitchens, yes.
yeah, that's a communal living space with sofas. So the cluster flats are based around on this southern, my own recollection, southern side of the building, and then the individual units are based along here. Is that correct?
Yes, sorry, just to add that there's a mixture, or there's a selection of individual standalone or separate student rooms, and there's also a collection of rooms that have a shared living space per grouping. If you could get the first floor plan up as well, so I noticed a comment about the games room, which is on the ground floor. One of the advantages of this scheme over the consented scheme is the addition of the basement, which has taken out a lot of the cycle storage from the ground and first floor, which has allowed greater commercial and student accommodation for exactly because of comment, which I take on board. So the ground floor had games room, but on this floor, if I could address the group.
There's a pointer here.
Yeah. Is all of this area here is all for student amenity use as well. So this is all for, to be clarified exactly what those uses are. These are for the student use at this, in all this area here. This area, all access off the course. So all the students, have a choice of standalone bed sits, but they also have the choice of grouped student accommodation where they have a shared living and kitchen space, plus they have all of the shared student amenity here, which is for activities within the building that allows them to create a community. This is very similar to Type Construction's model that they've got on other sites where they have shared amenity space, which allows students to interact within the building, but also then have the wider city at their doorstep as well. Not sure if that answers your question, sir.
Yeah, so who's your HEI, or are you Unite Housing?
This will be a direct scheme, a direct let scheme, and given the location in terms of transport links, it appeals to a wide range of price accessibility to a number of institutions in terms of travelling to a place of learning.
So what does that mean? You didn't, I don't think you answered the question.
It's a direct let scheme.
Okay, so I could just explain, right, so it's with the private provider?
Yes.
Okay, and do you have a provider?
There's nobody in contract yet, but
Okay.
Tide tend to exclusively deal with the top 2 or 3 most well-respected management company providers in the UK.
Okay, Councillor Gallagher, and you next.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. The first one is about the affordability. Would you be able to tell me how much roughly the affordable shared ownership flats will be going for?
No, I don't have that information. But they'll comply with the council's normal affordability criteria in terms of adopted policy. So I don't have the numbers. But it's been designed not to try and take issue with the council's novel approach on either the social rented or shared ownership.
Okay, could you tell me how much the affordable student rooms will be going for?
They'll be complying with the requirements as currently set out in the draft London plan, so in terms of 55% of their maximum student income.
Okay. I've got two more questions. The issue about the play space not meeting the sunlight assessments. I think that was in. Oh, I noted it. I remember what it was reading. I can't remember which building off the top of my head that was in because it's 9 o'clock and I'm exhausted. But it was in one of the. It was noted in one of the things around the play space section or the sunlight section. And the other thing I'm wondering about is the impact that 758 units full of people will have on an already overcrowded Lewisham station, which I understand that 400,000 is being contributed to deal with that, but I don't feel particularly reassured by anyone that this has been thought about to the extent that the TfL and the Boogaloo extension has been thought about. There's been quite a lot of attention on that, and that isn't even clear yet, comparatively to the impact on the station.
Well, we don't have TfL in the room, but I mean, the planning officer has had extensive communication with them, so I think we've had their assurances that they are happy with that.
Yeah, but what I was saying is that we've talked quite a lot about the Boogaloo extension, and that's good, but I don't feel like we've talked enough about the impact that this development will have on Lewisham Station.
Oh, okay.
And as well, the question about the play space not meeting standard developments.
The play space, as part of Tide's approach in terms of not wanting to, actually we're being encouraged to try and adhere as far as absolutely possible to the approval that was granted by the council last year, and not to go down the road of making unnecessary changes. The approach to the play space is consistent between the two schemes, and for some of the reasons that you alluded to in terms of the provision of the way it's been designed, coupled with the public realm elements, coupled with financial contribution, that seemed to be an approach which was sort of conceived through that scheme back through 2017 and 2018, and led to that sort of ultimate approval. I think with regard to the impact on public transport capacity, I think extensive discussions have been had with TfL, as I think the planning officer referred to that culminated in a fairly lengthy letter. The TfL wrote confirming their position on each of their headings, not just actually on the Mega Loop Line extension proposals, but on every other facet of public transport issues. Obviously, the scheme is approved in the sense that the previous scheme was approved, and that's factored into the approach that the capacity analysis that's been done as far as Lewisham Station is concerned. And in terms of the changes between that scheme and this particular scheme, I think the differences are that it changes the level of movements by 83 visits to the station during the morning peak. So it's as a percentage, it's quite a small change between what's been approved and this version of the scheme before you this evening.
Okay, finally, I've got Councillor Curran, I think. Oh, and Councillor Gibbons, okay. And you haven't finished, Councillor, right? Okay. Bear in mind, we've got objectors to hear yet, as Councillor Gallagher pointed out, it's past 9 o'clock.
Can you explain to me the difference what's the difference in the quality of noise and vibration insulation between the original application and the current one, given that reduced floor thicknesses?
Both schemes would have had to fully comply with building regulations. Absolutely, I think the one advantage of this development is the fact that it's a modular constructed building. So those, the construction of the accommodation itself, so much of the structural construction, if you like, is done within a factory setting. So the environmental conditions of the factory setting are obviously far enhanced and allows you a much better quality of product that you can get when you're building out in the open air on a normal, conventional, more traditional method of construction. So fully compliant, both versions will be fully compliant. So the advantage with this approach is that it's much controlled in the factory setting.
Thank you. But my question was, what's the difference between the level of insulation, the two different systems?
The insulation is exactly the same to reach the same standards through building regs, which is a control and testing sound impact and sound transfer. And I think just to support the comment about the construction, because it's made in a factory setting, the level of quality through air gaps and other things that can happen on site in wet production, such as plastering and other construction methods. This is a far more efficient way and a quality control measure, so that every room would then pass clearly through a factory setting to make sure the sound is exactly the same.
You're saying there is no difference?
There's no difference at all in the insulation. The insulation would provide the same protection of noise between rooms or dwellings as the consented scheme previously. It's just a slightly thinner slab because the production of the modules allows the structure to be reduced slightly. It doesn't reduce the quality or the level of sound transfer or impact. Just to say, it will still have to pass the same standards.
Okay, right. Councillor Gibbons, question?
Yeah, just to kind of help put this in context for me. I know that we have the target of building 13,847 additional homes until 2025, and the draft London plan increases our housing targets for Lewisham to a figure of 2,117 dwellings per year. So in that context, this scheme is very close to the Mayor of London's threshold for affordable housing, but because of the exceptional infrastructure, the kind of sort of doming underneath the building to allow the tube tunnel to go through, that's got taken away 10% of what could have been affordable housing. But we have these incredibly ambitious targets for housing. I'm not a structural engineer, don't know anything about it. How much would the bulk and scale of this project have to be reduced to prevent that kind of exceptional infrastructure underneath? Are you possible? So currently it needs to a huge amount of money is pumped into kind of building that tunnel, strengthening.
How much sure there isn't a structural engineer sitting around this table actually?
Okay, I just think it helps put it into context about sort of why that money needs to be spent there, and what scale would need to be reduced for that to be avoided, that really heavy infrastructure which is costing you an awful lot and costing us housing.
I'm told by one of the planning officers that they can answer that actually.
Okay.
And you get well done.
Oh.
Okay, have a go.
The costs related to safeguarding the Bakerloo line extension are not a product of the scheme. They're a product of the infrastructure requirements that GLA, TfL and the Council want to see delivered as part of improving public transport infrastructure in the borough. So that is in effect well, I'll use the word loosely, but a fixed cost in terms of that is not related to the scheme itself. Mm-hmm. So anybody coming forward who are looking to redevelop this site has to factor that into the proposal. And I think looking at it the other way around, I think is that if you then you don't get any cost savings by reducing the scale of the building. In fact, what happens then is there is less value in the building as a whole to be able to support that, and that will have a consequential effect on reducing the level of affordable housing and other facilities within the scheme. So it becomes a less viable means of delivering development on the site, whilst also safeguarding everything that public policy wants to achieve in terms of public transport improvements.
I think the transport planner would say that, I mean, the station has got to go where it's got to go, and try and alter that at your peril with all the knock-ons to that, to all the rest of the planning for a new tube line. And so all the costs that effectively overarching that station fall on the developer, who happens to be lucky or unlucky enough to have the site that falls on that spot, but the benefit is of course much more widespread, including the benefit to overall transport capacity for everybody who starts or ends their journey in Lewisham town centre. But Michael says he's got an answer to that as well, unless the applicant has said just what you were going to say, Michael.
So basically the same answer. So if they were, looking to do a 10-storey building, it'd still be the same tunnelling underneath. So it doesn't really matter above ground. But in unit terms, so based on the current 1,385 units in the current day target is 15%. It's 23% of the annual housing target, and on 2117 London plan, it's 15% annually. So it's quite a big chunk.
Okay, right. Councillor Ward, did you have one final question that you need to ask the applicant?
Yes.
Okay, go on then.
So, my question is, why is it a 42 weeks let? And then your allocation policy, if it's a direct let scheme, what is your allocation policy of 10% affordable? Because I have seen schemes where developers have essentially gone fastest finger first and given discounts to those that have applied rather than those with biggest need. How do you check need against students who might be coming from a disadvantaged background so that they can get the discounted all rates?
Well, entirely happy to work with the council in terms of whatever drafting provisions the council wants to insert in section 106 to ensure that that's absolutely delivered. Time and no interest at all in the situation that you're talking about. I know from schemes that we've done elsewhere that they're committed to working with the authority and to abide whatever clauses are entered into in terms of the section 160 agreement.
And why 42 week let and not 35 or 32?
Well, I think the 42, there are a variety of institutions in London. I think 42 week let is pretty standard, and it's on that basis that it's not as if Tyler proposing 50 weeks or something, as you alluded to earlier. So it's on that basis, which is a pretty conventional way of then assessing the ability of the scheme to deliver all the other things in terms of affordable housing as well. So there are advantages in terms of delivering affordable housing.
Chair, with the applicant's statement in mind for the previous question, officers, have we got a condition that would ensure allocation to the most disadvantaged students? And if not, could you think of a form of words for something?
Well, I think what the applicant just said was that they would have that to be, this would be covered by the section 106 legal agreement rather than conditions. And as long as that aspect is included in the heads of terms, and we could ask officers to put it in, if it's not, then we could be okay. We could be assured that they would have the power to impose that, and if you wanted to have a discussion later with them, bearing in mind that you have some expertise in this area, then I'm sure they would appreciate it. So have we got that in the 106 heads of terms, and if not, could we put it in?
Chair, it's not currently in the section 106 heads of terms, but there's no reason at all why an allocation mechanism couldn't be secured through the section 106 agreement. I would suggest that any such clause in the section 106 agreement should require the developer to agree that allocation mechanism with the local planning authority, so that we would contend that it would operate on a fair basis before they then would be required to operate on the basis of that allocation mechanism.
With specific needs to disadvantaged students?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've resolved that, and I think we've finished all our questions. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask the use more than one mic if you want, but only one will work at a time. You'll have 5 minutes between you to make your presentation, so hopefully you decide what order you want to speak in.
Yeah.
If you could start by introducing yourself and telling us who else you represent, if anybody, please.
Yeah. My name's Cheryl McLeod, Lewisham Housing Forum.
Bill Jeffries, Lewisham Deputy CLP.
Robert Robertson, also Lewisham Deputy CLP and a resident. I've lived in Lewisham since I was 16, 1974. I moved here. I've seen Lewisham change dramatically and not for the better. It's unbelievable. On a personal level, I feel completely alienated and devastated that I walked in the centre of Lewisham. And to have this now, I never thought I'd be sitting here making an objection like this. It's really, it hurts.
Yeah.
It does hurt.
So when we did hear about this proposal of 35-storey structure that was going to be placed within Lewisham, Lewisham and Deptford CLP, they done a motion. When I say CLP, I mean for some people from behind, constituency Labour Party. So this is the opposition to the Lewisham Tower Block, and this is the motion. This CLP notes plans will be submitted to the council next Tuesday, the 16th of July, to approve the building of 2 tower blocks in Lewisham Town Centre on the site of the old carpet right shop. One building will be 35 stories high and the other 20. This is considerably higher than the existing tower blocks built in the town centre. Just 28.9% of the units built will be deemed affordable. This figure includes shared ownership dwellings. The proposed C3 affordable housing mix is a 60% 40% split between social rent and shared ownership. In brackets, 40 SR, 27 SO units, close brackets. This mix does not achieve the 70-30 policy target for mix between a low cost, immediate affordable housing products. This also fails to meet the Lewisham core strategy for housing, which commits the council to negotiating for an element of affordable housing to be provided in any major residential development, with the starting point for negotiations being a contribution of 50% affordable housing on qualifying sites across the borough. That all social housing will be in 20-storey blocks, creating in effect a corridor system for social tenants. This CLP believes Lewisham Town Centre has already been blighted by the construction of numerous high-rise, low-quality buildings that have provided zero social or council housing.
1 minute there.
It is about to be further degraded by the Gateway 2 development, which also provides zero social housing. That this development clearly fails to meet the aspirations set out in Lewisham's core strategy for housing. That this development clearly does not contribute to meeting the pressing needs for social and council housing in the borough, but simply serves to line the pockets of the developers. Lewisham Council should reject this. Lewisham councillors should reject this scheme as unsuitable for Lewisham. 35-storey buildings are totally inappropriate for Lewisham Town Centre.
There's also problems, so there's not enough affordable housing, it doesn't meet the target. If you look at the student housing, not only the issues that you raised, but astonishingly cramped. The social amenities are on the first storey. This is a 35-storey block. What if you're stuck on the 35th storey in a tiny little pokey room? It's not going to be a safe or healthy environment for students' mental health. The public space is astonishingly dirty. If you go, there's a square outside Asda, just along from here. It's full of dirt and rubbish. It's in no means a friendly and open place. It's in perpetual shadow. There's also a children's playground just along from there already, in perpetual shadow. There's going to be a terrible effect of shadowing from this block, which is enormous. As it showed on the things, you can see it from Blackheath. It's a huge, huge block, and it's very ugly. Is this the legacy that we want to leave? This is no beautiful building by any means. This could have been knocked up by a school child. If you asked them what they thought a tower block would be, they would draw a square block like this with a load of windows. So we think it's an awful proposal, and we urge you to reject it.
Okay, thank you. Don't do that yet, because members might want to ask you some questions about what you said. Members, has anybody got any questions for the objectors? Let's go far.
I was just going to ask if you had anything further to add, because you are aware that this scheme has already been passed in one form prior, which is not greatly different. I mean, obviously the inside layout and the student accommodation, whatever, but height-wise, you were talking about overshadowing. You are aware that this isn't a great deal different from the scheme that has already been passed, and I just wanted you to reflect on that. And also, I think Robert didn't have a chance to speak, and I just wondered if you had any points to add that were that councillors would like to hear.
I think the main point that I was going to make was about the percentage of social housing. I think to go for, if our target is 50%, to end up at 28.9% doesn't represent to me a good negotiation on behalf of the people of the Lewisham who so desperately need this housing. And there's lots of other questions. I mean, we only get 5 minutes, and we represent probably over 100 years of residency, and yet we've sat there quietly and been listening to developers putting their point of view for the last 2 hours. It seems to me a very, very unfair system that we, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Gibbons and then Councillor Gavin.
I'm going to surprise you, but I share a lot of your frustrations.
Really?
One thing I would want to point out is that the Lewisham Core Strategy commits the Council to negotiating for an element of affordable housing to be provided in any major residential development, with the starting point for negotiations being a contribution of 50% affordable housing on the qualifying sites across the borough, subject to financial viability. The developers had kind of, and officers can probably go into this in more detail afterwards. The developers have done their financial viability assessment, and then our team have looked at, or our partners on financial viability, have looked at the sums and said, okay, this is where it could be financially viable and be able to go ahead. You've also said that so it doesn't meet the kind of our ambitions, what we'd strive for, but that is caveated with financial viability. The second point is about the height and about the height of it. And that's why I brought up the point about, could reducing the size of this development on this site, which needs to provide that tunnelling underneath, could you reduce it down, say, to 10 stories, and then you won't have to provide that deep tunnelling as well, and therefore the whole scheme would be a lot cheaper, and you could downsize, but also maybe increase the amount of affordable housing. Something that officer pointed out earlier, that even if you reduced it down to 10 stories, you'd still have to provide that extremely expensive tunnelling. So we've got limitations of the actual site, and the height means that we could provide, almost reaching the GLA targets of affordable housing. It's not what we would want, but it's subject to financial viability, and I think that's what we have to kind of bear in mind. I welcome you to comment back on that.
I was wondering where the question was.
I mean, the context is Lewisham Town Centre, which is apparently is defined as an opportunity area, or whatever the term is, where hundreds and hundreds of units have been built, and absolutely zero social housing has been provided. We're starting off from a situation where we've already, in my opinion, destroyed the centre of Lewisham, and for what? What the community got out of it? Nothing. Nothing has been given to them. Except, apparently, the promise of artisanal pizza shops, craft beer shops.
Yeah.
They're no good to us.
That's right.
And now we have a 35-storey monstrosity in which we're going to be offered a derisory 28.9%. And when we look into the building, I'm still totally unsure about how the residential designs differ from the student design. You know, the whole thing it seems like a complete mystery to me. And also, I'm not very unhappy about the fact that all the social housing is in one building. You know, we've been assured by council, I've been assured that there's not going to be segregation of that kind in developments in Lewisham. And that's what I call it social segregation.
Right, we can. I suggest members we can ask the planning officer for assurances on the distribution of the affordable housing units within both the blocks. I think we understand that one of the blocks is primarily student accommodation, the other one is primarily flats. And well, there's something else I thought we could ask the officers. Oh yes, and we can ask the officers for some more detail of their analysis, obviously, and giving it to us in writing about the viability assessment, and also, I think, in the light of other applications that we considered recently, how consistent that is with the same considerations of financial viability that will have been done on behalf of the London Mayor and the GLA. And I think I'd like assurances that those are consistent with the ones that our officers and our consultants have. Councillor Gallagher, I think you had a question for the objectors as well.
Yeah, just to say, like Councillor Gibbons, I also obviously share a lot of the concerns and frustration with that all of you have. I will disagree that I think that it's necessary to build tall buildings in order to provide the amount of social housing that we want to try and get. I think we would disagree on that. That's okay, but I think that in a town centre area, which this is designated as, there's going to be tall buildings. The other thing that I would say is quite depressing, but planning law is very much written in favour of the developers, and this is something that has been to a big frustration of mine since I've been councillor last year. And even more depressingly, this is the highest amount of affordable housing and social housing that has come in any development that I've seen in the last year, which is kind of speaks to a bigger problem, but that is the current kind of planning that we are facing right now, and that's just to give a little bit of context with that. Yeah, just to give a little bit of context with that. Well, sorry, and the other thing I was going to say, yeah, like Councillor Pushu said, I think the reason that all of the affordable housing is in one block is because it's all of the residential accommodation with some student and then all of the student accommodation, and actually I don't disagree with that, even though I very much disagree with affordable and private housing being segregated. I don't think that's necessarily the same because it's student accommodation. People might disagree, which is fine, but personally that's just what I think.
Just a small comment on the proportion of affordable housing. Of course, there's 30% approximately affordable housing. Only 60.6 of that is rented, and therefore, 40% is shared out. So actually, it's only 18% really of affordable housing, far lower than the target of 50%. But also, I think we need to ask about the ethics of financial viability, which is essentially stuffing the building with as many students as we can without appropriate social space or amenities or facilities. I don't think that is appropriate, that we should sacrifice the quality of our expectations for what is good accommodation for students to the need of the developers to make their profits.
Okay, I think that's an ethical discussion which I'm pretty sure has been had and will be had many times in this very room, but what's occurring in this room at the moment is a planning committee, and we have to consider the application on the table in front of us in accordance with all of the planning law and policies that we've got in the various levels defined primarily by the government we've got at the moment, and we have to operate within that. Right, if you could resume your seats now please, I'm going to ask the planning officer to reassure us on the points I've outlined and then any other points that members want clarification on. So just on the affordable housing distribution, and also if you could ask those points about the financial viability statement, for which we've got an extensive report that's in public and in the papers.
I was to say, in terms of the financial viability, can you hear me? Yeah. In terms of the financial viability, that's the thickness of the report in terms of the concept of the entire agenda. Completely done in public, so there's been quite a lot of back and forth on this. So the offer that came in originally was for a residential building and a student building, primarily in favour of shared ownership. We raised objection to that, to say there should be an increase of social rent, which they've done, and it's target social rent, so it's the cheapest form of accommodation which you can get, basically. And the scheme was naturally amended again to provide affordable student residential. Now that's in the taller building, with private student in the lower building. So it's not affordable housing and affordable student crammed together. It is distributed between the two. It would not be possible to have normal housing, student housing mixed all together. You could just never manage it that way. The viability reviews and the viability appraisal undertaken has been done in the GLA context, so using the existing use value, the profit levels for commercial space, residential space, and so on. So it's been done in the GLA methodology.
Okay. And just the distribution of the within the block, which is flats rather than student accommodation. What's the distribution of the affordable units with the not so affordable units, or whatever we want to call them? Are they potted? Are they on particular floors?
Yeah, the social rent units are on floors 1 to 12, I think it is, and the shared ownership units are on the floors above that.
Oh, so sorry.
So they're not pepper potted, but they're
distributed within the building.
Sorry, can I just clarify? So are you saying that the first 12 floors are all social rent, and then the ones above it are all the shared ownership?
That's correct.
That's
a problem.
That's a problem. I think people not agree.
Because you have poor floors.
Yeah, that's just changing poor buildings into. I don't understand how people can't see that's an issue.
What's the reasoning for arranging them like that?
Well, to practically manage the building. The building will be taken by a registered housing provider, and the social rent units will be managed by the registered housing provider, and shared ownership units are sold.
Okay, and what do we know about the quality in terms of how the units will be finished and fitted and whatever? What is there a difference? Is there, or is that 10-year plan?
I'm not sure I can answer that question.
Can I just ask the applicant then if they can give us any information on that, please?
Thank you. there'll be no differentiation between the social rented unit or the shared ownership. They'll be completely tenure aligned in terms of their construction and fit out.
Can I check? Are the shared ownership, forgive the ignorance, I'm still getting my head around the way the shared ownership works. Are they going to be sold to a registered housing provider, like many other shared ownership units are in these kinds of blocks, or sold completely like independent because they're going to have rent paid on them as well, so they'll need to be managed by a company and so on. Wondering whether they'll be managed by the same housing provider as managing the social properties.
It's highly likely that it'll operate exactly that way.
Okay, so if they're if it's highly likely that they'll be operating in the same way, why in God's name are they not mixed throughout the building and they're creating per floors rather than per doors?
It just creates when developers have conversations with registered providers. I can't think of an instance that I've been involved with, certainly in the last 10 years, where the registered provider has not been absolutely adamant in terms of the way they want the social rental units in particular managed. They have a different sort of management regime to the shared ownership. They want to be able to do that as efficiently as possible to maximise the number of affordable units, and those are the responses that we get time and time again. I haven't had a different response in 10 years of doing this.
I'm pretty sure we do have instances where units are pepper potted, and even with units that are for sale, for outright sale, obviously a shared ownership unit. My son lives in one at the moment in development in Greenwich. He's fundamentally still rented, and the facilities are managed by whatever the management agency, the housing association is there. Apart from the fact that there is a capital asset in there belonging to the tenant. So I'm sure we do have instances. I'm sure planning officers can remind us which ones they are in central Lewisham, but we do.
Yes, you certainly get pepper potting between the shared ownership and private for sale units within development. But certainly, in my experience, I can't think of an instance in 10 years where social rented has been pepper potted in the way that was suggested. But there might be different experiences in Lewisham.
Michael, can you tell us where we've got either a consented or a built scheme where the social rented units or the affordable units are pepper potted?
Just before we do that, do we need to suspend standing orders?
We will do, yes, members. Are you happy that we suspend standing orders until we've reached a decision?
Agreed.
Well, I'll take a vote on it if you like.
Yeah.
Show of hands. Okay, right, yes, thank you. Right, carry on. And then I'll ask Michael to... Michael, identify an example of what I've imagined.
So it's quite common, so in Lewisham town centre, to have shared ownership units dotted about with private units. That's quite common. But on, so for example, Renaissance or Thurston, as the block is, the rented units are consolidated, and that's to minimise service charges for those occupiers. But you can't tell who's who because they're designed to the exact same standard.
Right, the design and finish is tenure blind.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is just one clarification. I was under the understanding that in a building there cannot be any different service charges for different people, no matter if they're in social, rented, or if they're in shared ownership or private. That's the impression I was under. So how would that impact the service charge if it's all in the same building? Does that make sense?
It would be higher for everyone.
Well, that's what
Well,
I'm trying to.
Is there any suggestion that the service charge would be different for different forms of tenure?
I thought from what Michael just said that it was about consolidating the service charge in that particular bit. Sorry, maybe I'm misunderstanding. I'm just not quite clear.
So, for example, you've got different lifts in the building. Maintaining a lift has an expense to it, for example. So, if you've got units on the lower floors that have a singular lift, that is a lower cost of maintenance. You have more lifts, you have more maintenance, and you have higher costs. If they're dotted all throughout the building, that's shared between everybody.
I've got a question.
Okay, I don't see that this is substantially different from other mixed tenure developments in Lewisham Town Centre. We've been assured that there are similar distributions. Yeah, okay.
So I would like to ask a question about management, and this might be something we will have to look at outside this meeting. However, I'm very aware of the secure by design standards make it very difficult for people in, say, floor 7 to get onto floor 5 or 7. This is quite bad in these kind of developments when kids want to go see their friends on different floors. Is there anything that is being proposed here that would stop people being able to use the lift or access floors that they do not live on? Because I think that would also be a problem for me, because I wouldn't want kids not being able to mix with the rich kids upstairs.
Or the poor kids upstairs.
Or the poor kids upstairs.
Okay, well, how and by whom can we be assured that everybody who is a resident of the building, regardless of tenure, would be able to visit their neighbours in all other parts of the building? I've never seen, I can't recall seeing that as a condition, but
I don't think that would be the case. The scheme is securing shared amenity spaces, so at your roof level, your roof terrace level 18 or 19, and your first floor indoor amenity space and next one is shared between the entire building, so there would be free flow movement, so kids could play with each other.
okay.
Just for clarification, so if there's different lifts that cost different amounts to operate, and that is why some service charges are able to be lower, does that mean that there would be a lift that services the social floors and then goes straight up to the shared one at the very top, missing out all of those shared ownership ones, and then there would be a lift that either goes to every floor or misses out the social ones and then goes to all of the shared ownership floors? Because I don't feel very convinced that this is
How many lifts are in the building? That must be obvious from the
So the floor plan has 2 lifts and the stairwell which you need, and that serves all floors from the ground floor up. And then there's a separate lift, and that's for the student block. But they are separate buildings within one building in effect.
Yeah. So yeah, I think so in different applications where they might, because of the whole point of the different service charges for different types of tenants and different occupiers, it's about they have separate lifts that go to, and so I think we all follow that. But that doesn't apply here, so therefore we think, oh, maybe we can actually pepper pot these different types of social housing and different types of intermediate housing around the block, because the lifts go to every single floor. However, I would say that the registered provider is probably in a better place than us to know the needs of their tenant and what their tenants would prefer. So would they prefer, and if we are going to start with a base that these are tenure blind and the social housing is fitted exactly the same as the intermediate housing, then we can later have a conversation with the registered provider saying, what do you think your tenants would prefer? Would they like to be all on one floor, or would they like to be pepper potted? We can do that at a later stage.
Well, I don't think in the context of just considering this in the planning application, we have the opportunity to have that conversation. 14, and also the other student accommodation also occurs on floors 2 to 14 on each of those floors, as well as the other floors. Then that sounds like pepper potted to me, or the definition I've heard of it.
Well, apart from if you go above level 14.
Well, okay, there isn't any on levels 15 and above. Yes.
Yeah. But is that what the officers think?
But that sounds to me as if, I mean, the objective of pepper potting affordable accommodation is that there aren't ghettos of poorer people and richer people, if you like. There is a mixture. You don't know whether your neighbour's paying rent or has bought their flat or whatever.
I agree.
That is the point of that policy, and that's a policy that this council would like to support.
So what I want to hear is from officers who said a very different thing to that, to clarify.
Sure.
Michael's just given me some assistance and just been reading the report. So the understanding is very clear. They're on levels 2 to 12.
It's 15.
Right, so 2 to 12 in the report, the base order of the others provided.
Mr. Applicant, would you like us to amend that number 12 to a number 14?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Right, that might help us get home earlier, I don't know. Right, okay. Duly amended, I hope. Right, could you resume your seat, please? I think we probably asked you enough extra questions that we hadn't planned for in the first place. Okay, do members want to raise any other outstanding issues that we haven't already examined? Otherwise, I think we've got to reach some sort of conclusion fairly soon. It's past 10 o'clock now, not just past 9 o'clock, and I can't think of anywhere else we can productively go on considering this application. But does anybody else?
Chair, if I might, I'd quite like to just agree, whatever, I'm not sure which way this is going to go. I would like to make sure that there are some things that are moved into the substantive of this, and we've said that there would be addendums to the Section 106 agreement. We said that there would be pepper potting wherever possible, and I'm a bit confused about if this is the student block and the other block now, so I'd like some clarity on that, but I would also like to get that into the substantive of the report, and then before we take stuff, the report as a whole.
Okay, right, so I think perhaps officers can remind me if or Councillor Walsh has missed out any things, but I think we just clarified the distribution of the affordable units and received a satisfactory answer that they do fall within what we would class as pepper potting. So that and also we've also received a separate assurance that their construction finish is 10 years long, I think. Is that correct? Yes. Right, okay. So I don't think we need to write anything else into any recommendations to cover that than what we've just been told is in there. The Section 106 heads of terms, what was the additional head of terms I suggested would be in there?
An allocation mechanism to be included with allocation to the discussed with Lewisham.
Oh yes, right. The allocation mechanism to be discussed with when the management organisation is identified. Yep. And I think we were assured that officers could come up with that they would add that into the head of terms. It wasn't in there at the moment, and they could come up with a suitable outline for that to cover what you raised.
I would also like to add in something about any tenant in the building is able to access any floor in the building. I find that for me that's a red line thing. I think that only being able to go to your floor stops communities. I think it has all sorts of other issues as well in this context. So I don't know if that is a condition. I don't know if that's informative. Officers, I would like you to make something to make sure we get residents being able to mix with other neighbours as possible.
Okay, I think we're all understanding the points of that. So I'll ask officers to tell us whether they think they can turn that into a condition or a section 106. You can turn it into a section 106 clause, yeah. It occurs to me outside of consideration of this particular application, then a set of those standards or measurements, if you like, for what do we accept as a well-arranged, well-managed affordable housing is something we ought to write into a policy or a standard. Let's agree to do that, but outside of consideration of this particular application. So it's something we can just put on the table and say to future developers, this is what we expect. Yep. Okay, but that's outside of this meeting.
And also in that guise, outside of this meeting, but I still think it's quite important, I think we're going to get more and more student-based accommodation. My understanding from meeting with the senior leader of the University of London last week and having a discussion about this is this seems a safe bet investment opportunity when housing is not anymore. So I think we need to be very clear on what our standards are in the future for halls of residence and making sure they uphold good design principles within them, particularly about amenity that is nearby. Going to first floor or basement when you're on the 35th floor is not necessarily a great experience.
Right. As you say, that sounds like potentially another spec we talked about at the meeting. Okay. Has anybody else got any other issues they want to raise? If we're assured of that.
Too tall.
Does anybody feel minded to move either recommendation that's on paper with the amendments that we've discussed and have been confirmed by officers? Or does anybody want to move any other recommendation?
The one way I agree with you.
Okay, Councillor Alderman, does anybody want to second that? So you've moved the recommendation that's on the, it's actually on the amended report, it's a supplementary one, just to be clear, recommendation A, which is that we agree with